Hello and welcome to JudgeCast. This is episode 348. I'm one of your hosts, Bryan and I am joined this evening, afternoon, morning drive to work by the one and only Charles Feather.
Hello, hello.
And the one and only Marcos Sanchez.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah. Hey, so this episode, we're going to talk about something that we haven't actually talked about before in the 15 years that this has been a podcast. So in previous episodes, we have talked about how to apply to events and some tips and tricks that might get you staffed, but we haven't really gone into the other side of things. That is, once all the applications are in, once all the dust is settled, how an actual staff list ends up getting built. Okay, so we're going to talk about LGSs, RCQs, some ballroom events towards the end, all the way up to MagicCons and Pro Tours. However, do you guys have experience staffing things at like the LGS or the ballroom size?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit,
right. Yeah. Do you have any experience staffing Pro Tours or SCG cons or Magic cons?
Only in my wildest dreams.
I'm surprisingly deficient in this area.
Yeah, so instead of just listening to us navel gaze and theorize about how staffs that complicated get built, we've decided to bring an expert on. So, hello, welcome to the show, Meg Baum.
Hello, that's me.
Yes. Hi, so Meg, for the listeners at home who might not be aware of who you are, can you tell us a little bit about what your background is, what your roles and responsibilities are?
Yeah, absolutely. I have been a judge for a very long time now, since about 2011. I started out in Detroit, eventually moved to Chicago, and now I live in Seattle. The highest level I ever reached was like an old school level 3. I've judged all over the world at this point. Still haven't made it to Asia, though. Looking forward to that at some point. And what I currently do is I am the staffing and events manager for Pastimes, and we are the tournament organizer for all MagicCons and a whole bunch of different conventions like PAX, Gen Con. And then, as you mentioned, part of MagicCon is also staffing the Pro Tour, and I also have the opportunity to staff Worlds, which is also standalone this year, so that's cool.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking about staffing at all levels. However,
Hey, Bryan.
Yes.
I think we found the right person.
Yeah, probably.
That's
you
me.
think? Right. So now you've thrown me all off, man.
You threw off the Emperor's Groove.
Yes. So what we're going to do is the overall goal of staffing events at every level is, within your budget, get the best staff that you can. And I phrase that first, at least in my opinion, is because the budget tends to be a little bit more rigid. Like, there isn't a whole, like, you were given a certain amount of dollars, and yes, you might have a little bit of ability to play with some of it, but as a whole, you will probably not be able to get the staff you want, or rather, the staff you want will cost you an unlimited budget or an undefined budget, and that's more of the constraint that you have to work in. However, budget and quantity and stuff like that looks super different at the different levels. So let's start off with, we're going to spend most of the bulk time talking about MagicCons and Pro Tours, and I guess even conventions and stuff. I mean, you don't have an expert on, and don't listen to them. But we do want to cover LGSs a little bit. Okay, so what goes into staffing at LGSs?
So for me, it always comes down to basically having the communication with the tournament organizer or the store owner, which is typically one and the same. And you just basically get told either this person who is always here and who really knows the rules or is already a judge is going to be the one who just kind of runs things, and they do the thing day in and day out, week in and week out. On occasion, you might get hey, we want to do something big and special. Here's exactly how much I'm willing to spend on it. Don't you dare go over budget. Sound about right?
Yeah, a lot of times for LGSs, staffing falls into one of two categories. Either they staff you like 4 months out, or they realize a week before the event that they don't have a judge.
2 days. 2 days.
Right.
Easily.
Those and you get and if you are contacted, you get the old, we had a judge, but they had to call out. They didn't.
They did.
Right. But typically, what happens is they have a certain rate, and they will, if you're willing to work the event for that rate, then okay, they'll take the first person, and if you're not, they'll maybe negotiate a little bit, but if they don't, oh well, I guess we'll just have a store employee run that RCQ.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're limited and your hands are tied on how much you're willing to spend, obviously, I mean, I think one thing we should always remind everybody is every tournament organizer is a business. They are in the business of making money, and very rarely do they ever want to lose money. Now, some TOs will, on occasion, decide, hey, I'm willing to lose a little money for the exposure, the experience, getting people into their store who may have never seen it, that sort of thing, marketing, advertising, whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, you can't really talk them into giving up a lot of the money that would be coming into their store to keep their lights on and to keep food on their table.
Yeah, I think that when you're talking about budget, even at the smallest LGS type of level, what you're looking at is the budget of a staff for any given event is a given cost of the event. The same way that product is, the same way that keeping the store open to run the event is, the same way that staffing store employees is. Because the other costs that would exist at a larger event, things like back of house, scorekeepers, etc., those things still exist at the LGS level. They're just absorbed into the TO role more often than not. And when you look at it that way, it starts to make sense because the TO is always going to be looking at it from a TO's point of view, from that business more point of view, because that's their job, that's their role. And whenever you're talking about the staff the best that you can within the boundaries of that vision from the TO, that's your role most of the time as like a head judge if you have multiple people under you, or if you're that local judge and you're like, hey, maybe this event's a little bit bigger and I might need a little bit of help. It justifies the cost for XYZ reason. So this is when you're looking at judging from a more like businessy type of view, both from the TO's perspective and sometimes from a judging perspective, because you can argue that a staff should be slightly bigger and that it is that therefore worth the cost.
It always strikes me how bad players are at figuring out this math too. A lot of times they want to try and figure out how much they should be paying for their event fee. And they really very rarely take into account the additional expenses that Meg just talked about, including the judge staff, because it is a real cost to running the event. And if there isn't proper planning for it and an accommodation for it, you do end up shortchanging somewhere and losing out. And that's TOs never want to be in that position.
Not even just the judge staff, but like the RCQ kit.
Right.
That costs dollars, right? So... All right, so that's kind of LGS in a nutshell, and we didn't spend a whole lot of time on it because typically when you're only talking about like one or two judges, the decisions are very straightforward. They're very linear. So we're going to bypass ballrooms and just go straight to something that's not linear. MagicCon staffing. So, Meg, would you describe MagicCon staffing as linear, like a linear process where you can just follow process A, then B, then C, and never go back to one of the earlier decisions?
If you have truly ascended into being a fourth dimensional being, perhaps. But the problem is that there are quite a few linear decisions to be made in here that go in completely opposite directions from each other. And the big point of trying to navigate all of that nonsense is about balance.
Okay. So when does, for staffing, how far out does staffing decisions actually start?
So it depends. So my goal for the largest events, things like MagicCon, Gen Con, those two things, are to get acceptances out 10 weeks out. If I ever have to buy into time somewhere, I'm going to try and make it so that my life gets harder, not everyone else's. So I try and eat into my time for actually sending out acceptances as opposed to the time before the event for folks to be able to appropriately plan travel, plan their hotels, all of that jazz. And the goal there is 10 weeks out because that's roughly about how far I can physically get it, because that's when all of the planeswalking ducks are in a row so I can start actually getting staff things up and running. But honestly, if I could get things staffed out as far as humanly possible, I would. But if I could get them staffed out for the rest of the year, I would not, because that's a little too far, because so many different things change at the drop of a hat that you need a little bit of that flexibility. And that 10 weeks out right in there is the sweet spot. And I would ideally love to have about 2 weeks to like go over applications. And then for however long the application's open, it doesn't matter how far open I have that application. Like half the people are going to apply in the week before it closes anyway.
Okay. Well, sorry. What I guess I meant by the decision is, or the question is, okay. So the 10 weeks out at that 10 week point when you're sending out acceptances, you've already made the decisions as to how many judges you need total, how many back of house people, how many scorekeepers.
Yes.
So I mean like that information, like when you're trying to figure out how many judges you need, how many back of house, like how far before the event are you?
I have
figuring
already
that
started
stuff out?
on 2026.
Okay.
Boy.
Okay. So the LGS 2 days out is you're more than 2 quarters out. Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
As often as, so basically whenever you're talking about making, so like, for example, once that schedule goes public, right? Whenever the players can start registering, I had to do all of the math to figure out what kind of staff would go into running those events way before those events got out to the players to register for them, right? So when you think about how the entire event works as a whole and how staffing fits into that entire ecosystem, it starts to make sense that some of these things have to happen that far out. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Makes sense.
And I think that sometimes we don't realize, but you're a part of Pastimes, but there are 2 other organizations that are part of this whole thing, right? There's Repop and there's WotC, and you work with all 3 in the planning stages, correct?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like MagicCon as a whole is an event that Pastimes just runs the ticketed play part, but we have to have all of our stuff together and ready to go for ticketed play, and for at least for me, for the Pro Tour as well, whenever those things start to go live to the public, whenever we have information out there, when registration goes live, or when some information needs to go out to like the pro players from WotC. Certain things I need to have done and ready to go in order to like actually make those things function, right? That's my part in making sure the entire machine runs.
Okay.
So what you're saying, this is chess, not checkers.
It's like that 3-dimensional chess from Star Trek with a little bit of the one that sucks you in into the game.
I love that.
That's an old reference. Okay. How far out do you select the Pro Tour head judge?
So Pro Tour head judge, Jared and I work together on that. So we try to time the actual like choosing of those to be just before a MagicCon, so that if the head judge agrees to it, we can announce it at the next MagicCon as kind of a way of like celebrating the judges that make it to that like pinnacle of judging and giving them like a moment of like hurrah at any given event.
Okay. So you tend to select the head judge, have the head judge selected like a full quarter before.
Yeah, it really boils down to when we are allowed to start like telling other folks like where a city is. I can't exactly ask someone to head judge an event if I can't tell them where that event is.
Yeah.
It's kind of an unreasonable question at that point.
Okay.
But as far out as reasonable, yeah. And then I try not to do it again too far out, because they wouldn't be allowed to tell anyone else, and that's a nightmare I wish upon no one, even if it is a one that's kind of fun. But taking that time between they know they're the head judge and everyone else can know they're the head judge, I like to make that as small as possible.
Okay. Are there any locations that have special needs with regard to staffing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like there are definitely cities that are easier to get to than others. Places like Vegas are really easy to get to from almost anywhere in the world because of the nature of Vegas, right? But that's true inversely for other cities sometimes. We haven't necessarily had a MagicCon, and I don't think that we ever would have a MagicCon at a city that it would be necessarily super difficult to get to, simply because I don't think they have a convention center big enough to hold us. But there are certainly other smaller conventions and stuff where it's like, even if you're staffing, 50, 60 people, it gets a little bit harder if the plane ticket to get there is way more expensive than it is to fly to a city with this massive international airport with flights every hour to every city known to man.
So when figuring out staffing profiles and budgets and stuff like that, do you actually look at the average cost of flights?
I do. I will Google the cost of flights. I'll Google the cost of hotels for that time frame. A lot of work for me goes into trying to figure out what the actual costs would be as best as I can estimate them. Because all I can ever do is make an educated guess, especially when you're talking about things like the fluctuating changes in currency around the world and whether or not, this flight, that flight, weather, that, and the other thing. All sorts of things can happen. It's always an estimate. But I do genuinely go look up all of those things to figure out, what is a reasonable estimate for this given Pro Tour? What is a reasonable estimate that I'm going to look at for Gen Con for getting into the city this year? Like those type of things.
Or at what point, using the acceptances at 10 weeks out as a benchmark, how far previous do you have to create I'm going to call it like a staff profile, as in we need this many judges on Thursday for setup, and this many on Friday, and this many on Saturday, and this many on Sunday?
I call it the Skella staff, and it's genuinely the staff schedule for the most part that I intend to use filled with a bunch of fake people.
Okay.
I love that.
Okay, and
I start building that whenever Liz or whoever else is helping make the actual schedule for the event starts making the schedule for the event, because they can't tell appropriately how much any given event costs if I can't tell them how much the staff dedicated to that event would cost. So if I'm already going to sit there and do the math as we build the schedule, I might as well build my schedule at the same time.
okay. And do you find, based on the location, like, and we'll just say within the U.S., because obviously going over to Europe would change things dramatically, like factoring in estimates as to like Vegas versus Chicago versus if you were to have one in D.C., like how the staffing profile changes based on location. Like how do you figure that out? Like, is it just look at historical data, or do you have something else?
So MagicCons are kind of a unique beast because, one, they just keep getting exponentially bigger. Like each MagicCon has just been bigger than the last. It just has. And they just continue on that trend. And despite us having returned to a couple of the same cities a couple of times at this point, I do take a look at past MagicCon attendance. But it's not necessarily based on the city. It's more based on the type of event that's running, because MagicCons are so unique in the way that they impact a city when they go there, even for the first time, that's something people will come out just to see. It's a spectacle. It's something interesting. It's something different. It's not, oh, if I went to one Grand Prix in my city, I've been to a Grand Prix in most other cities, because they were very similar to each other, and that was fine. But MagicCons, it's not like that. They have unique things. They have other draws to bring people to them. So instead of looking at any given location or a city for specifically MagicCons, instead I'll take a look at what's popular in that location event-wise, right? Like when we're building the schedule. And it's like, oh, okay, we put, certain things on the schedule because, players were asking for it, or it's popular in this particular area of wherever. And then I'll go, oh, okay, so when I'm thinking about judges, I need to think about someone who either is well-known in this area in that type of format, or who is good at this particular type of thing. Maybe they're a vintage expert. Maybe they're well-known to this community, that community, those type of things. But the actual physical location, other than for the raw gauging of how much travel I'll give out to somebody, doesn't super factor in specifically for MagicCons.
Okay. All right. And so a question that for large event staffing, what are some of the roles that folks might need to, or what are some roles that you have to staff for that some people might not be aware of or part of the staffing process?
Right. So kind of how I was talking about when we were speaking earlier about the LGSs, the type of things that you would see at a small LGS tournament, just like the number of judges on staff has been, exponentially grown and magnified out quite a bit. The same thing is true for everything else about the tournaments as well. So that's true for the scorekeepers, that's true for the back of house, that's true for how prizing works, those type of things. And then even at the MagicCon level, and for Gen Con at least, and any of the other conventions that would reach that size, that volume, even the TO team starts to expand out just because simply I need more help. You know, I haven't quite reached Ascension yet. There's only one of me at the moment. So I just need more help. And so for MagicCon, you have things like the tournament organizer team, which is just literally, I need more red shirts, right? For those folks who have been to larger tournaments, a red shirt would be like the manager, right? Of any given stage, of any given area, those type of things. They're the TO rep for the thing that you're doing, right? I need more of them at MagicCon because there's just not enough of us. It's huge, right? The same thing is true for Gen Con because it's huge too. But when you're also talking about things like back of house, that exponentially grows because the pure volume of product that's going out, those type of things. So when you're looking at a MagicCon, it's really a good representation of our entire industry and ecosystem, not just judges, right? And all of the things about a MagicCon are huge. They're, 10 times the size of any given thing, right? And that's all of the other jobs you would see at an event as well. Like, I have enough folks on my prize wall to staff an old school open. You know what I mean? That's a lot of people. So that means that they need a team lead. That means that there needs to be an area manager over there. Because when you also start thinking about how much stuff is over at that prize wall, that's going to require a back of house manager type of person too. So when you get to that volume, it's all of the jobs you could think of at a Magic tournament times like 4 or 5, literally.
Yeah, and if I can say something about that, it's really difficult if you've never attended a MagicCon to really grasp the scale of a MagicCon. Like, it is colossal. Like, you think it's, maybe it's just like a big Grand Prix or something. No, it is 4 or 5 times bigger than you could even project that it would be. Like, sometimes you walk into those halls and you're walking 15 minutes just to get from one side to the other because there's just so much happening, and the event play space is massive, like absolutely truly massive. So like, to think that you have to fill all of that with responsible humans, that's a huge ask.
So for example, Grand Prix. For example, MagicCon Vegas 2025, the one coming up this year, has 260 members of staff, and that's just the folks that I hired. That doesn't count any of the actual Pastimes folk.
Wow.
Or any of the wizards, or any of the Reed Pop staff, or any of the vendors, or any of the artists. It's a big production.
Can you walk us through a little bit about the behind the scenes when you're accepting applications? So you send out the solicitation. You say, hey, MagicCon City X is accepting applications for judges, and they start coming in. In the time that you're accepting them, are you reading them? Are you sorting them? Are you thinking about this person would be great running stage green? Are these things that you're considering as they're coming in, or do they just all come in and then you sit there and say, okay, I have everything, and now I'm going to play Tetris?
So, if I'm being perfectly honest, the very first thing that I do is I sit there and I wait to see who is the fastest to fill out the application first. I don't know why. It makes me giggle. I like sitting there and waiting because it only takes about 5 minutes for someone to be like, oh yeah, I'm not reading anything in this application. I will fill this out mostly with autofill. Let's go.
Is there somebody who consistently gets it done first?
Yes, it's the same 3 people every time. No, I won't tell you who it is because one of them would think it's hilarious and the other 2 would be very embarrassed.
Oh, that's funny.
So that's I will tell you with Command Fests, I do the exact same thing when I post something. Like, the first day, I'm actively checking applications, and then after that, I kind of, just kind of let them come in as they come. But like that first 24 hours, I'm watching, because you kind of want to see who's excited about it, right?
Sure.
Does that weigh into your decision factoring at all of like, oh, these are the first like 10 people who like immediately were waiting for this, clearly are invested in this, that sort of thing? Or is it more just for your own amusement?
It is 100% for my own amusement.
Nice.
Right, but
I've seen some
let's
TOs who do care for sure.
let's say, yeah, I'm not sure of the exact number, but let's say that you are going to hire 250 judges for MagicCon. That just ballpark. That's a number for the moment.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a lot of judges, and it sounds like you probably have 3, 4, 5 times that number of applications. It seems like a lot of work to wait until everything's in to start making any decisions at all.
So waiting to see who applied first is just the first thing I do because it kind of amuses me. And then I just kind of watch as they trickle in. Most of the time, I'll have posted an application at the very end of my day, and it'll be like the last thing that I'll have done. And I'll post the application, I'll boot up some game or something, and I'll leave the application like open in another screen so I can see applications as they come ticking in, just to watch them, right? Like as B-Pro was saying, there's something that's just kind of uniquely satisfying about watching those first couple tick in. Now, do I necessarily think that there is some sort of fervor, excitement, etc. bonus given to the first person to fill out application? No. Do I think that there is a certain amount of buff there given for somebody who fills it out in the first week that it's open? Yes, that's nice. I like being able to kind of think about my decisions a little bit earlier. And while I don't mind I submitted this technically 38 seconds after midnight the day you closed it, it's really not a problem. It's really not. I do start making some decisions, not final ones, but like starting to get my ducks in a row when the applications start coming in. Because sometimes I'll see an application for someone and I'm like, I have the perfect job for this person at this show. They'll love this format. Or, I know for a fact that they absolutely love this random influencer that is hosting this particular event. They'd be the perfect head judge for that event. Those type of things. As soon as I see one of those applications come in, I'll be like, yeah, that sounds like a perfect match. Unless I have a compelling reason to change this, that's probably where I'm going to keep you. And then after I post an application, depending on how much time I've given myself to actually read all of the applications, I'll start like either once a week or once every other day going through and reading applications as they come in, right? Because I read every single cover letter every single one of you writes me. I am not exaggerating. I read all of them. There is a judge on MagicCon Vegas whose cover letter made me laugh so hard that I will talk to him about it as soon as I see him. I've never met him before, and his cover letter was absolutely hilarious. And I start doing those things as soon as they start rolling in. And as they do it, I have them in a spreadsheet, and I'll leave myself comments, right? Because even if I have some decisions that I'm thinking about making or some choices that I can see being very easy ones based on somebody who applied, nothing is final until I've closed that application. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do make some decisions, and those decisions have a little bit of inertia, but they can't be undone by certain late applications.
Correct.
Right.
If I've announced the head judge for the Pro Tour, that is not changing unless, something unique and exceptional happens, if you will.
I think one of the reasons I wanted to drill down on this is because we have this notion of how, let's say a mid-size event, and we'll get to that in a little bit, works where, a lot of times the judge manager has told us, oh, well, I wait until I get all the applications in to make a decision. I just want people listening at home to understand the scope of this role that you fill, because the number of applications to me is mind-boggling. You've got to be able to, and you're staffing Pro Tour, which is kind of a separate process, and on average, 6 or 7 main judge areas, because you have one for each of the colors, and then you have the Command Fest area. And then you also have the back of house stuff, and you have all these other things. There's a lot of pieces.
So another thing that gets done in this particular process is whenever I have applications for scorekeepers, I'll pull all of those out into a separate document and just leave the name, cover letter, what days they want to work, and just the bare bones information, none of their PII. And I'll go over those with Liz, right? Because Liz is kind of in charge of our scorekeeping department. So she'll help me go through all of those. And sometimes we'll have scorekeepers that are contracted between the shows to help out with the pure volume of scorekeeping that needs to be done in between the shows. Because you have to remember, every single one of those hundreds of on-demands that got ran at a MagicCon had to be sanctioned. And somebody had to go sanction those events. So we call in, help to do with those type of things in between the shows as well. So whenever we have somebody who's already on and contracted working in between shows, who's a scorekeeping expert, I'll also ask their advice for, scorekeepers as part of their role contracted between shows. Same thing is true for certain things having to do with back of house. I'll separate all the back of house and ask Alex his opinion because he's, in charge of our logistics at Pastimes. And so there are other folks who do get to read the applications. For the Pro Tour specifically, one of the reasons why we choose the head judge ahead of time is so that the head judge can give input on the applications. I want the head judge of the Pro Tour to be able to choose their other head judges, their head judge team, to be able to support them best. I want them to be able to give their opinion on who's working with them at the Pro Tour, because the Pro Tour, within the big match, if you will, of the MagicCon, its individual match, is actually very tiny. It's just a 300-ish player tournament with a ridiculous judge to player ratio, to be honest, and it needs to be a very specific subset of judges, not just in skill, but in language, in experience, and in a bunch of different factors, and that needs to have the head judge's input on it. So all of those things get separated out into their own documents so that I'm the only one who has access to the big archive of everybody's info. So there are a handful of other people who do help me out, but a big chunk of the judges on ticketed play, that's all me. And the only things that, like I said, I'm locking in super far ahead of time, especially before the actual application closes, I might do something like reach out to a judge and be like, hey, I have this event on the schedule for, Vegas or whatever. I really need a head judge who's going to, study these wackadoodle rules because they're either archaic, ancient rules we've dredged up from the bowels of time, or we just made them up. And I'm going to need to make sure that somebody actually reads them and dedicates their judge brain to learning how to do that for me. So I need to have that conversation, kind of far ahead of time. So if I know I'm already going to have that conversation, I might have that type of conversation before the application closes as well. Because if they say no, if they decline, if that's not something that they're going to be interested in, I need to find somebody else.
Okay. So let me ask this. So you've said as you read applications and you think, hey, this would be perfect for this person. You kind of dog ear their application for that particular event.
Yep.
But after all the applications are in and you have, several hundred judges with a whole bunch of, I can work Friday, Saturday. I need to work all 3 days. I'd like to work, they have all of these requests in with travel sponsorship requests and stuff like that. Where do you start? Like what is, you were staring at the blank page. What is your approach to making that page not blank anymore?
The very first thing that I do is I take every single one of the applications and they start getting mad color coded.
Okay.
So I take the Google form that everyone fills out, spits out into a Google Sheet. That Google Sheet, I then start applying a whole bunch of different color coding keys that I've made up for myself to make my life easy, where it's like, oh, okay, I can shrink this column down to being very tiny where I can't see the text, because I know if this box is red, it means that they need 4 days plus setup for Gen Con. But if this box is orange, then I know that they need 3 days. But if this box is light red, it means they need 4 days, but they don't need setup. And I just kind of have all those things set up for myself. And then in another column, it'll be like, if this one is, dark red, it means that this person is, can't work any day except setup. So they can't, whatever. I have a bunch of different, oh shoot, what is it called? Conditional formatting. I have a bunch of different conditional formatting set up for my spreadsheets so that it will tell me different information about the actual applications, so that I can condense down all of the information that I have to crunch through to its simplest form so that I can power through that part and really focus on things like reading people's applications, reading people's cover letters, making sure that I read that travel cover letter. Because as we move forward in time, the challenge of trying to keep up with things like inflation, etc., when you're looking at a staff that comes from all over the world, um, gets a little strange and dicey. So we addressed that by putting it into the travel comp. So I really want to make sure that I'm reading those travel cover letters. So that means that every single one of those applications, for the most part, is going to have 2 cover letters for me to be reading. And then it starts off with from the top down, basically, with the pro tour and like my area leads and like big event head judges, those type of things being some of the first things that get filled out, and then kind of cascading down from there and filling in the slots on that Skella schedule that I talked about earlier.
Okay. Let me ask. So there is a person. There's 2 hypothetical people.
Yep.
So I've got one hypothetical person that says I need to be staffed all 4 days plus setup, and I need lead. I need lead jobs for all of them, and I need travel sponsorship. Okay, so they're shooting the moon. Okay. Okay. And there's another applicant that says, yeah, I can work like 2 days or 3 or 4. I'm pretty flexible. I don't need lead positions. All right. Now, from a staffing profile, obviously that first person fits only in like one particular slot, whereas the second person can fit in multiple areas. Do you tend to evaluate the highly restrictive applications first and then use the highly flexible ones to kind of fill in gaps, or do you start with the highly flexible ones, or is that just not a thing and I'm completely thinking about it the wrong way?
So it is a thing, but it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It is just a thing that is true, right? Uh, so with the person who is very, very specific in what they want, right? The one who is very non-flexible for whatever reason. And to be perfectly frank, it's not particularly my business what the reason they're not flexible is, whether they think that that's the specific position that they deserve or the amount of money that they deserve or whatever, or whether or not that's the only way they can afford to come to this event. Maybe it's hey, I would really like to actually spend the weekend at home, but if you tell me I'm going to head judge the pro tour, man, I really will come out. Those type of things, right? So if you are using that specificity to tell me that, hey, I really need this very specific thing for specific reasons, whether or not you want to tell me the reasons, that's okay. That's information, right? And that's stuff that I need. I need that information in order to actually staff events. And more specificity is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, does it mean that there is a possibility that I either tell you, no, I don't have a space available for that, or no, I can't, necessarily fit you into the budget for this particular event because you need max travel? Yes. But that's okay. It's an adult, frank conversation. Like it's a real piece of information to be giving to me that you need a specific thing. Whereas
Okay.
if everybody just says, I'm flexible, put me anywhere, that's fantastic. But one, don't do that if you're going to be frustrated whenever I put you somewhere because you said you would be flexible and now your weekend's wonky and not exactly what you wanted. You didn't communicate to me what you wanted. You said you would do anything. And 2, it's nice for someone to be flexible and be able to put anywhere, but to be honest, if you're somebody who like very specifically wants to be doing certain things, like in back of house specifically, scorekeeping specifically, then you need to tell me that. Like the flexibility is fantastic, but only if you intend to continue being flexible. If you would like to focus on a specific thing or do a specific thing, you have to actually communicate that. Does that make sense?
So yeah, so don't put that you're flexible and you can do anything, and then once you get accepted to doing thing X, you go like, oh well, I would really like to do thing Y instead. Can I not?
Exactly.
If you use the guise of flexibility to get on staff, and once your foot's in the door, you try and change it.
And
Okay.
it's like, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, this is how much it costs for me to come to this show, or going, hey, I only want to come to this show if I'm head judging or if I'm, doing XYZ. That's perfectly fine. Be specific, but also be okay with me going, no, thank you then.
Okay. All right. So, how does travel stipend request change the formula for applicants? Okay, or is it just total dollars spent? Is that or how does that work more or less?
So for me, the way that I treat that is the travel stipends is actually one of the very last things that I look at because I try to staff the event the way that I think it should be staffed first. And then I look at the travel stipends as this is how much the people that I would like to be there in these roles costs. This is how much they cost, right? For me to have what I want, this is how much these folks have told me they cost. Now, there's a reason why there are two different kinds of travel requests in those applications, right? There's here's what I absolutely need to come to the show, and here's what would be nice. Here's what would make it easy, right? But somewhere in between those two numbers is where judges want to land, right? Very, very, very rarely am I going to go above what someone said would be nice simply because I need to be using it elsewhere. And it's not necessarily oh, you're better than this other person. That's why you get more money. That's not what that's for. This is if I would like to have this person independent of this while I'm picking this, I need to pay this much money to get them to the show. That's what it's for. And so I'll staff the show the way that I think that it should be. And then I'll take a look at, okay, if I staff it the way that it should be, this is what travel comes out to. Okay, do I have wiggle room in either direction? Is the staff that I've created that's my dream perfect staff, right? Is this too expensive? Those type of things. And then I start moving things around based on that part. So for the first thing I do is I approach it from the, how would I staff this if I'm not, going absolutely crazy, staff everybody 100% wackadoodle, but how would I do this reasonably the way that I would like? And then I take a look at, okay, did this actually math out to being an appropriate number and within budget? Yes. Okay, cool. Oh, no. Okay. I need to go back and adjust.
So because you're also staffing the Pro Tour at the same time as something as massive as a MagicCon, I noticed that the applications for Pro Tour and MagicCon are typically on the same one aside from head judge. So how does that complicate or how does that affect your process when each one of those seems to want to pull from the other a little bit?
Well, again, I just keep circling back around to it. It's genuinely about balancing these two things. It is my responsibility to make sure that the Pro Tour is staffed to the best of my ability while also simultaneously making sure that ticketed play is run to the best of my ability. So in order to do that, I need to make sure that I have experience, that I have talent on both sides. Now, that also means that I need to be looking at the specific and unique needs of both of those areas and addressing those almost individually and then seeing if those two things actually clash. So like, for example, the Pro Tour by its nature has players from all over the world. So one of the things that is very unique to the Pro Tour is a very large focus on languages. We want to make sure that there are staff members on staff to the best of our ability to provide players the opportunity to explain themselves in either a ruling or an investigation in their own language so that they can explain themselves to the best of their ability. That's a thing that's pretty unique to the Pro Tour. Is that something I would like to achieve on ticketed play? Of course I would. That sounds amazing. I'd love that at any tournament. But it's almost necessary for the Pro Tour because it's players from all over the world on purpose. Now, balancing that out also with ticketed play side. The ticketed play side is a giant logistical leviathan. It's huge. It's a monster. It makes some judges who have that logistically minded bit of their brain, it makes them giggle with glee and want to tackle it. Now, for a very long time, the overlapping good judges meant that the people appropriate for the floor of the Pro Tour and the people who could tackle a logistical leviathan like that is a small circle. And that's okay. It just means that we need to start expanding out. So we need to balance those two things. And it also means that we need to rotate through some people as well. So for me, it's about not only balancing the skill, experience, the things that are operating, but also the opportunities that exist on both sides of this same coin. Right?
Are you...
So like, sorry, go ahead.
When you say rotating through, I just want to clarify for a second. Because of the limited slots in the Pro Tour side, do you mean rotate people into that, or are you trying to rotate specifically back in the other direction?
So, like, for example, the Pro Tour is not a particularly logistically challenging event. It is more of an event where you are on hot standby, where you are not going to be asked very simple rules questions about random things because the players who are there are at the top of their game. But you might very well be more deeply embroiled in something like a he said, she said, they said type of situation. Uh, or other types of deeper investigations. Those are the types of things that you experience on the Pro Tour side.
Yes.
Whereas over on the ticketed play side, I need have like these huge league style casual play regular REL events that require a lot of logistical planning and really need to be tackled and might involve a lot of silly questions and but it's just as much product pass out as a 1,200 player Grand Prix might have been. The regular REL to competitive REL didn't change that. However, I still have folks who are on my side of the ticketed play side, who they often are people like, area managers or team leads, those type of things on my side. And it's not necessarily fair to always keep them there. So very specifically, they get a turn on the Pro Tour every once in a while if they applied for it, because I don't want my side of ticketed play to always keep someone, in a box.
Right.
People deserve to have opportunities to shine on the Pro Tour. That's true for new people. It's true for people who shine in other areas but don't necessarily get their chance because they only speak, one or two languages, those type of things. So I try very, very hard to make sure that those opportunities really do rotate out to other people and that people get better opportunities, while simultaneously the ticketed play side, it's not too shabby either. And it's one of the reasons why I made every single one of the head judges or team leads the same as a floor judge rate as the Pro Tour, so that nobody would, lose out literal cash wise by being on ticketed play with me either. Because the entire thing is about balance, and neither one is the main event, neither one is sides, neither one is less important or less hard or any of those things. They're just different. And one's televised.
When you are making up your schedule, okay, what level do you worry about redundancy or overstaffing with respect to backouts or travel problems or something along those lines? Like, I think, yeah, go on.
This is one of the places where I have been told by a couple of folks who might know what they're talking about that I overplan a little bit, because I have like cascading repair-esque levels of, if this person can't come, this person moves up, this person moves up, this person moves up, like in my notes built into the back end. Like there's a whole formula for it, because one of the things that I have to do when I'm talking about building that Skella schedule is the plus or minuses on standbys. So I also have to explain the situations under which I would activate certain standbys, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So I have like literal cascading repairs built into the schedule, all the way down from if the head judge of the Pro Tour can't show up, who replaces them, all the way down.
And then who replaces, you pulled them from a spot, who replaces them, and so on and so on.
Correct.
Okay.
Wow.
Just for folks, does anyone want to tell our listeners at home what a cascade repair is?
Yes, I've spoken of the ancient magic.
Yes.
A cascade repair has to do with what happens when, during an event, you realize that player X and player Y are paired against each other, but something happened previous round, and something was misreported in terms of the previous round's match win, and or some missing player shows up or something, and you suddenly have to restructure who is paired against who, and it's a cascade effect, because if the person is 3 and 4 is matched against somebody who is no longer 3 and 4, then you have to shift players all the way down until everything works out. And what you would do in the old ways is you would send out judges as quickly as you could to the different repairs and tell everybody to stop doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then
Oh, that was always the most frantic run ever.
And then the scorekeeper would send out a second set of instructions. This is how we're fixing it. And it was complicated and terrible and wonderful and glorious to watch all at the same time.
Right.
Now, I will say that we did have a cascading repair at the Spotlight in Denver.
Awesome.
So for the listeners at home, what Charles was talking about, when you have a player match or a mismatch, two players are going to be playing against each other, and you cannot. That means there is another match that is incorrect, right? There's at least two matches that are incorrect, and you can't just swap one of those players for each of the match, because then you have players that aren't playing against the correct opponent with respect to points. And so, like a zipper, you have to start unzipping matches and moving players around. And that's the cascading part, is because you can't just affect two matches. You have to do 3 or 4 or 5, or maybe if you're really unlucky, go all the way to the bottom.
Whatever number of repairs it takes you to get to the correct result without repairing the entire field. You're going to repair one at each level of results, essentially. It's kind of crazy.
It's fun. Okay, so is there, before we get into... Oh, well, actually... you were talking about planning for the schedule in terms of if someone backs out, but do you have like a we think we need X number of judges, so I'm going to send acceptances out for 110% of X? Or do you said standby, or do you just plan on having that 10% be standby?
So I have a certain number of folks who are on standby, not all of whom are judges, by the way. Some of those folks are very specifically standby for either scorekeeping or back of house. So if you ever see a schedule where it's like, oh man, we're so understaffed, why are there still 2 standby? It's like, those might be folks who are just on standby for back of house or prize wall, and I've already pulled all of the judges out of those places. Trust me, if we ever hit that point. But whenever we're talking about like the numbers for events, let's take Vegas, for example. I basically get to be the determiner of what the appropriate number of people on any given event is. I'm the person who gets asked that. I am the chooser. And so what I do personally, and this is where my experience as like just a judge, and I still judge quite a bit. It's something that I'm very passionate about. I love judging. And this is where my skills in that really come into play, because I think to myself, if I was the head judge of this event, what would I feel comfortable with staffing? How would I want to run this event if I were on this staff? What would make me comfy? What would I appreciate? Right? And looking at it that way, it's like, okay, I can try and get like a pretty good ratio. So for Vegas, for example, for any of the events that have a dedicated head judge and a team to them, there's roughly a 25-to-1 judge-player ratio, roughly.
Ooh.
Which is pretty good.
Yeah.
In general judging terms, that nowadays is pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
When you look over to the general scheduled events teams that don't have dedicated per-event teams like the Cups and the SLS, those type of things do, the ratio gets a little stickier. But it's because whenever one of those teams that's dedicated to one of those events isn't running that event, they're reporting over to that team, and the ratio gets much, much better. The places where that kind of breaks down and gets a little funkier are in the places that don't necessarily have events to ratio them against as well. That's places like the command zone, places like on demands, things where it's a little more nebulous as to how many players that a judge is actually going to be interacting with at any given time. So whenever I want to put padding somewhere, I try to put those paddings in those places, because nebulous works both ways, right? So if I can be kind of nebulously understaffed weirdly over here because there's a lot of players but only one judge, but it's not like they're flipping rounds, I can also be slightly overstaffed over here because it's not like they're flipping rounds. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so whenever we're talking about those cascading repair type of game plans, there's also, for lack of a better term, because this is how I think about it to myself, mostly because I was watching a lot of Grey's Anatomy when I was coming up with it, is kind of like event triage, right? Like, where are the places where I start pulling judges out of to report to other places if there is either a gangbusters event that's absolutely ridiculously busy, or if it's like, oh, I had 3 people, no call, no show, or something like that, where do I start pulling people out? Where do I start, pulling people to come help with things? Like if I have a scorekeeper go down, usually there's 1 or 2 scorekeepers or people who are capable of scorekeeping in back of house, because it's easier to pull a person out of back of house and throw them onto the stage than it is to take them off of judging and put them onto the stage.
Okay. So before we start talking about the actual sending out of acceptances, so is there anything else that we missed or that you specifically want to bring up about the decision-making process for making the staff lists?
Not particularly. Another thing that I want to point out, along with reading everyone's cover letters, travel cover letters, special requests, all that jazz, I also read every single one of the recommendations that comes into me for judges. And the number of recommendations that I receive is a lot higher than the number of applications I receive. And because any
Really?
given judge could have more than one recommendation for themselves. And so, one, I will unabashedly use this moment to communicate something. If you have a letter of recommendation, you don't need to send the same letter over and over again for different events. It's just a letter of recommendation for you, not for the event, but for you. So you can just send me one.
So I can't. You don't want me to just keep sending Marcos's letter for me for every single MagicCon?
You specifically can continue sending whatever letter Marcos gave you as a recommendation.
Excellent.
Resolves.
I mean, I created a fictitious scenario there, but Marcos, could you please send me a letter, and I will start sending it to Meg.
I knew that was going to be the next request.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. If the first letter in every sentence could spell out a hidden message, I would also appreciate it, like BoomTube or something like that.
And challenge accepted.
or your third favorite dinosaur?
Yes, my third favorite dinosaur is pterodactyl.
That needs to be what's there.
It's pterodactyl. The third favorite is pterodactyl.
Really, not Pachycephalosaurus? Come on.
No, it goes T-Rex, Triceratops, pterodactyl.
Excellent.
Yes. Okay.
For those who have never filled out a application for Meg or for Pastimes before, occasionally you get asked that particular question or something else. So you need to have an answer.
I also ask questions like that on the application. I think on the latest one, I asked, given the recent discovery that dinosaurs were feathered, is a chocobo a dinosaur?
Yes.
The number of people that said no was a little depressing. But
I know nothing about Final Fantasy, but I do know that the chocobo is the bird thing.
Yes. It's the big yellow.
It's the big yellow bird thing. It looks
like anime big bird.
Looks like a giant ostrich chicken.
All right. Allegedly. So you've made up the staff. Acceptances go out now. In other acceptances, there is this. You've mentioned waves of acceptances.
Yes.
What is that, and what is the purpose of that?
So, the first wave of acceptances is going to be the biggest one. It is the biggest chunk. It is the majority of the folks getting an offer to work this event. And the reason that I do it in waves is for a couple of reasons. One, sometimes I don't have every single decision made down to the end, and I'm still waiting on a couple of answers for some people for some things. And I need a couple more days. So maybe some folks are going to get their, acceptance on the second wave. Notably on Vegas this time, we had some pretty significant delays. And so I had to send out a much bigger wave 2 than normal. But also, the reason that we do this in multiple waves is because if anybody does not want to accept the offer that they received, they can decline it. And if they do that, I need to be able to send that offer to someone else. So the very last thing that happens is declines. And that's why I do acceptances in waves, is either because somebody didn't accept it the first time because they got busy, something happened, what have you. Or maybe they're like, oh man, I just checked flight prices and now they're way more expensive. I can't do that. Those type of things. And yeah, that's why we do it in waves.
Okay, cool. So, wave 1 of acceptances goes out. A few days later, wave 2 goes out. And then a few days later, declines go out. So how hard is sending out declines?
There are very few things that I have done in our industry that are more heart palpitation inducing than sending out both acceptances and declines. It is all of the excitement that one receives from getting the acceptance or decline letter times every single one I had to send out, if I'm being honest.
Combined with a little anxiety over if mail merge worked correctly.
That's correct. Just, dear God, did I make a typo? Did I skip a line where suddenly the wrong person's the head judge of the Pro Tour? Because that definitely didn't happen. It's whenever you send out a communication to that large of a group of people, there is the same sense of anxiety that one would receive when public speaking in the same way, because that's what it is. You are very digitally publicly speaking about something that matters very, very much to a very large group of people, and that's a big responsibility, and it's one that I take very seriously, so therefore it gives me anxiety because of who I am as a person.
And if you mess up, you're going to hear about it from like 1,000 different sources.
Oh, yes. And again, let me shamelessly say now, it is much better to send me a message than to publicly tag me to tell me I've typoed. Trust me, I know. I know.
I just remember on the Exemplar program, one day I sent out a form, and I left the preceding wave number on the form. When I woke up, I had 60 Facebook messages informing me of the typo. And it was just
my goodness.
Yes, good, yes, I know. I can only imagine for something that's like this. So one question I want to ask with declines. Okay. If a judge has a question about why they were declined, presumably you are sending out n number of declines. Let's just say 100, because numbers are good. What percentage of those can you respond to? Like, why am I one of the 100?
So whenever I send out declines, one of the lines in that email is, due to the volume of applications we receive, we cannot give feedback on individual applications. And it's not in there just to be legalese or just to be canned email speak or anything like that. It's honest. And basically, if someone wants to know why they were declined for a certain event, etc., and they see me at some point or something, that's different. But responding to that email, trying to get individual event feedback, is not something that I have bandwidth for, just to be perfectly honest. Very, very, very rarely is there like a specific reason or like you've done something wrong. It's just, this event is massive. There are only so many opportunities and we rotate through them quite a bit. And all of the bandwidth that I have for responding to emails and for focusing on event things is going to be, I'm sorry, on the people who are on the event who are still my responsibility. I understand that being declined is very difficult. I understand that being declined is not fun, not what you wanted to hear. Even to this day, I get declined for events. I understand. I genuinely do. But me, as the staffing manager, I just physically don't have time to respond to everyone who would want to know why they were declined for any given event. Because if there is something wrong, if we had a conversation, I was like, yeah, you should be at this event or something like that, and you get declined, please let me know. If you think there is genuinely something wrong, that's different. But if it's just like, oh, shucks, I got declined for this event, sometimes that just happens.
And I actually want to highlight something about those messages you send out when acceptances and especially declines go out. And you kind of touched on this a little earlier in your discussion of looking at applications and like the cost of a judge. You said something along the lines of like, it's not including the thought of you're better than this other person, therefore you'll get travel comp or whatever. But that brings me to the fact that I do notice you often talk about declines are not an assessment of your value or worth as a human being. And I always appreciate that you put that out there. Can you speak a little bit about your philosophy around why you make a point to comment on this when you're posting declines and acceptances?
So, like I was talking about before, this is one of those places where my experience on the other side of the stage, so to speak, as someone who has been a judge for many, many years and who still judges to this day, I'm being honest, I do still get declined for events, and I do understand the feeling. And when people who are into judging as much as we are, like the four people in this conversation, for example, um, whenever it's so much of what you do, who you are, what you're passionate about, and a lot of your world centers around it. When something goes wrong in that world, it's really hard not to have that feeling extrapolate out into other places that may or may not be appropriate to be feeling that way. Just because, you got declined for this event doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't even make you a bad judge. Like, not by a long shot. And I think it's important for people to hear that sometimes. And I always thought that whenever I was receiving messages of those type, that it's important for the people who are receiving bad news to get the exact same kind of care and attention to the best of my ability that the people who are receiving good news do. Like, again, if I were the head judge of this event, how many judges would I staff? Okay, if I were being declined for this event, how would I want to be spoken to? Understanding that sometimes you get declined for events, and that's okay. It is. It genuinely is. And if something is wrong, you can always come speak to the person. But how would I want to be talked to if someone was saying politely, no, thank you, not this time?
Definitely.
So, do staffing issues stop there? I mean, you sent out the acceptances, you sent out the declines, you've gotten through all of that. It's all smooth sailing until the event starts, right?
Oh, no, 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 no. When the acceptances go out is now when I'm actually responsible for all of these human beings in regards to this event.
What does some of that look like? I mean, in the remaining weeks up until the event, what are a couple of the boxes that you have to tick off?
So there's all sorts of tiny little tasks that need to get done, that need to happen in order to make the big machine work, right? So things like ordering t-shirts, ordering badges, making name tags, making staff gifts, making playmats, making bottles, keeping track of who needs a new name tag, who needs a new bottle, keeping track of who's had a name change recently and might like a new name tag, keeping track of who needs to have this, that, and the other thing updated. The big monster task that comes after that is I, like a, crazy person, like to ask people what shift they would like to be on at my shows and what events they would like to work on at my shows. So then comes the secondary sorting process into the Skella schedule of where people would actually like to end up at the show. So that's like, oh God, please don't put me in on demands. Please, no, no. Or I really very badly would like to head judge this event because I love, CEDH. Or I would very much like to be a team lead on the PTQ for this checklist for this, that, or the other thing. That's when I need to start sorting through all of those things. Keeping in mind
And
that there are other events
go ahead.
running and that I'm probably doing all of the other staffing stuff for a different event now whilst also doing these things for the current event.
Yeah, so that's actually a good question. How many events at any one time do you have in the queue at different spots in the timeline, in the pipeline? Is that a question you can answer?
I have 7 right now.
Good
My
God.
Tracks, and that actually leads to kind of a weird follow-up question that I have, or a second question. But before I do that, I just want to point out you listed all these little things, and I know that I can list like another 5 to 10 that I know that you're doing in the meantime that you still have your hands in, and then there's even more things that are happening, right? There's the whole Discord side of things where you always seem to be present.
Oh, yeah.
There's
I make the Discord.
there's everybody has to fill out tax paperwork and job paperwork, and everybody has to communicate to you if they have, and you communicate with everybody if they have certain problems or issues. I mean, it just boggles the mind how much more you have to do after you've accepted to shepherd so many people to whatever MagicCon is being held at whatever city.
Yeah, the absolute explosion of growth between the largest event that I had ever staffed, ever run, And even just M30 was absurd. That it was an absolute monstrous explosion in the amount of just pure data crunching that needed to occur to make it function. Um, and then, like I was saying before, like each one of these events has just gotten larger and larger as time has gone on. And I've definitely had to go through and really make certain processes that make certain things easier, like the color coding, like the different formulas and stuff that I have in all the sheets. Like the schedule itself, I won't share with anyone else, like editing access. I am the only one who can edit the actual schedule that everybody sees, because it is just directly linked to the compensation calculator. So if a change happens on that schedule, it means that the number on that compensation calculator changed too. So I have all these sheets not only linked between their tabs and their cells, but also linked together.
Right.
All right.
And occasionally
Okay.
I feel like a wizard.
Excel wizard. Is it Excel or is it Google Sheets?
Google Sheets.
That's
Most of the
scary
same.
in some ways.
Far superior.
Yeah, I wonder how much
it
of
is,
just-
but I get a lot of feedback sometimes. Never mind, that's not important.
I just wonder how much like Magic events as a whole, if Google Docs went down, like how much Magic events would fall apart.
As a side note, I do
yeah.
have backups for all of my stuff to make them work in Excel in case that happens.
Yeah.
Of course. Before we go to ballroom and boutique type events, which we do want to talk about, we have spent a lot of time talking about MagicCons and the scope and breadth that they entail, and it's obviously in some ways almost intimidating just from the size of it. But you also have a whole subset of events that Pastimes runs that I think is run almost on a almost on a boutique scale. Or a smaller scale. You run PAX Unplugged. You run Gen Con, Magic for Gen Con. These events are obviously much smaller than a MagicCon, and they're bigger than what we consider ballroom magic. How do things scale for you when you do these? Is that basically easy mode, or are there special challenges that you can talk about?
So the thing about those events is they present interesting and unique challenges because you are not in control of a room at a convention. At a convention, you're sharing that space with lots of other vendors, lots of other IP, lots of other everything. And so, even though the magic area itself is much smaller, there are challenges that you face at those type of events that are just functionally different, as well as the actual running of the events. Like an event is an event, no matter where you're running a pre-release, it's going to be a pre-release, right? But you need to take into account all the weird things that might make that pre-release go wrong depending on where you are. So like for size type of things, I used to measure things in the size of Gen Con. Gen Con was the largest thing that we ran consistently in the before Magic Cons. So I would refer to something like, oh, there's Gen Con, and then there's PAX Unplugged, which is basically like half a Gen Con. And this is back when, for Pastimes, it was just me and John Temple. And the other half of my job back then was also logistics. So when I was talking about half a Gen Con, et cetera, I meant that when we brought our entire kit full of everything that we needed to run a show, it would go to Gen Con because that was our maximum amount of stuff. So whenever I needed to do a smaller show, it would be half of that. And the same logic applied to, for the most part, to staff. Where it's like, oh, okay, I need to make these events, or I need to make these schedules for these judges match the events that are running for this. And those event schedules tend to be roughly half, right? They tend to exponentially grow with the event, and so does the staff and everything else that goes with it. So for Gen Con, the way I kind of gauge things now, Gen Con is like kind of half, magic-wise, is kind of half of a MagicCon, realistically. Which kind of tells you exactly how big Gen Con is, mind you. And even then, Gen Con still shares that space with so many other people, and we don't control our own registration and all of these other things, that it still has its own unique stuff too that makes it just as much of a beast as any given MagicCon at this point. I think I answered your question.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, Gen Con for me is a bucket list item. I've never attended. It happens during the summer, so it's very hard for me to go because of work and stuff. But one day I'll go. I'd
I was
like
about
to
to
see
say,
it.
I don't have an application from you, and I'm staffing it right now. So,
All right. So let's move on then to we'll call it like I don't want to say like halfway, but something that judges here might aspire to. Like I don't necessarily know if being the staffing manager for MagicCons is something that like a judge can aspire to be. Like they might. I will be a Pro Tour head judge one day, just because your role is something that you do for multiple events over the span of multiple years, whereas a head judge position is something that there are multiple opportunities to do that across a year. You might, however, be asked to do applications and stuff like that for a smaller ballroom event. And I think a lot of the stuff that Meg talked about is still applicable. It's just much smaller. It's what's that old toy line for like tractors and stuff. I think it was called like Erdl. I'm showing my age here. And their tagline was just like the real thing, only smaller.
about to say, are these like made out of pewter and like have simple gears and?
Oof. They were die cast. Yes, absolutely. 80s little toy diggers and bulldozers and such. Yes.
Sure.
So you for a lot of this though, where Meg was talking about having to color code days and stuff like that, when you're staffing a 2-day event or maybe a 3-day event, it's maybe you just, instead of color coding things, you just put filters on your Excel spreadsheet, and you don't necessarily need a separate spreadsheet for scorekeepers. You can just, these are the people that applied for scorekeeper, and let me put a filter on my spreadsheet. But you still need to track and sort this kind of stuff. Coming up with systems, yeah, absolutely important.
It's kind of like deck checks. You have to figure out what the way that works for you the best is. And as long as you can explain the way that your stuff works to somebody else in a way that makes them trust that you know what you're doing, golden.
Yeah. And a lot of times it's just the end result. Depending on for an event like this, for, like a 500 player event or a 500 player show, then the end result is probably what's important, and then being able to show your work if asked, like if they poke at any particular part. Yeah, you still need to have a budget. Now here's something. Even smaller local events like Ballroom Magic, you are still going to need to import judges. Like obviously a MagicCon has to pull from all over the world, right? Is there Meg? Is there anywhere any continent you haven't pulled from other than Antarctica?
No.
What's that island with the penguins?
Madagascar.
The one with
No.
Jersey?
Also, yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever had any judges from there?
I didn't want to start a political incident with the King of the Penguins, so.
Yeah. All right.
Smart move.
Fair.
They have their own game now.
Yeah, that's a vibes tournament prelim.
Oh, my bad. But you're still. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to get judges entirely locally. So you are going to need to pull from other areas, and local judges are potentially cheaper than non-local judges because they don't have the same travel expenses. So that
I think you also encounter, so for example, I imagine with MagicCon, odds are you can typically be very selective with certain roles, or you have at least a number of options for basically any given task with a few small exceptions. But if you're looking for like a head judge for a 1K, well, you kind of have your pick of the litter. Not always the case with we'll call it ballroom magic. Like there are some times where that weekend happens to be a challenging one because it happens to be going up against like a PAX Unplugged or a MagicCon or a Star City Games SCG Con, or just other things are happening that are pulling some judges away, and you might find, actually I only have like 2 people here who I could trust to run the big flagship part of my ballroom magic weekend. What do I do?
Yeah, that's okay. That's a fair point with competition. I don't think from a staffing standpoint, from an application standpoint, nothing's gonna compete with a MagicCon. Okay.
No.
However, I'll say from a Command Fest standpoint, I had to staff a Command Fest in Orlando the same weekend that Star City had an SCG Con in Virginia. And that weekend was very difficult to find staff because a lot of people were wanting to go to that event. So,
Like, I've definitely had conventions that were up against a Star City Open, or they were up against some other larger event. Like, it happens. And very specifically, one year, Gen Con was up against a $1 million PTQ in Minneapolis. So that was a huge event that drew all of the very excited, talented judges of the highest levels to it, and that was also like less than 8 hours away.
Woof. Yeah. So those are things that you might have to consider if you're doing ballroom stuff.
I think also budgets are tougher too at ballroom level, right? Like,
what?
Yes, you have some more play than your normal local game store might have, and you have like some flexibility. But again, ultimately, I think those ballroom events are much riskier for TOs because there is a very real chance that they've had to shell out so much for the ballroom, for possible hotels, for any number of other much larger costs that they might not be used to, that some TOs can very easily take a wash on those events if, the wind blows a certain way, it happens to line up against the wrong event, and they don't get the turnout they expect.
Hey, I've been to more than one where a TO will sit there and say, I will guarantee the price support to a room full of people, and it wasn't a room full of people. They're tough.
There's also something to be remembered about. Just because you are opening up applications for an event doesn't mean that all of the positions at an event are necessarily open for application. Like, head judge of the Pro Tour. That's not an application type of thing, and that's okay. That same kind of concept can be brought down in scope to like your ballroom sized event where it's like, okay, I know that if, my scheduled events lead and my on-demands lead are both really, really solid judges that I know that I can trust, this, that, and the other thing, that basically the other people on the floor can be people that I don't know at all, and I know it'll be handled, so those can be applications where I need to worry a little bit less. And maybe that means you're spending a bigger part of that budget on those people you can trust and making sure that they're secured in those places, and then kind of seeing how it works out for the rest of it because you need to secure in that leadership a little bit earlier. Because at a ballroom, you might not be doing the Pro Tour, but the same concept still applies.
Right. And you do want to lock in. I will say from my personal standpoint, I tend to lock in the scorekeeper positions. Basically first thing, like I make sure that I have with the applications I have people that I'm comfortable with as scorekeeper first and foremost before anything else, because that's also a role that is less I don't want to say less portable. They are not something that I can just like recruit a floor judge and stick them in the scorekeeper position like I could possibly take a floor judge and promote to a head judge position, right? Like I don't necessarily make the cascade repair situation like Meg does, but I do try to plan in at least some sort of redundancy. And that's you want to staff the positions that are the most specialized and the hardest to fill as quickly as possible, and then kind of let the other position. I don't want to say the other positions fall where they may, but once you get trusted people in trusted positions, then you have a lot more flexibility with the other spots.
The other way that I look at it is the more that I lock in those leadership positions, the more that I can actually understand the parameters that those floor judges will be facing, because I understand the way that those leads actually function, so I can better understand the experience those floor judges are actually going to have. So it's like, it actually helps me to figure out how many floor judges I need to be under a given team lead based on who that team lead is. Because if that team lead is exceptionally skilled, maybe they can be down one judge from what would be optimal because they're skilled and they can handle that kind of load.
Yeah. And with regard to with skill level and repetition, if you've had a judge with a high level of skill, or they've been in this role for this particular TO multiple times, they will require less instruction from you. And if they are new and this is their first time in that position, then you need to be sure that you invest and set them up for success. Because the last thing you want to have is they just show up and they don't know what to do. And you're like, well, it's just like last time. And they don't know what last time looks like.
Yeah, just because it was your last time doesn't mean it was their last time.
Right.
And the last thing that you want is for you to go, yeah, do it just like last time. And then they do something completely incomprehensible to you because they're doing it the way that they did it last time, not the way that you did it last time.
It's like when you're packing up a moving truck or something. The biggest, most challenging or unique thing goes in first, and everything else you can kind of slot in around that one big thing.
Yeah. But you have other similar things. Where Meg was saying, get shirts. Yep, ballrooms might have shirts. Tax forms. Yep, probably have tax forms. Are they in the Discord because that's what you're going to be using for communications? Yep, you're going to have to go wrangle people to add to the Discord. Which actually, Meg, how do you make sure that the right people are in are in your Discord, or do you double check?
It's in the Google form, right?
It's part of the Google form to tell me what your Discord username is.
Uh-huh.
And then I go and manually add every person one by one hand by myself because I haven't figured out a better way to do it yet.
That sounds efficient.
Oh boy.
All right. Yeah, when it's a small, like 20 person thing, I send them out, here's the link, and then I just watch the welcome channel and check them off as they come in. But yeah, I can see where with several hundred people that might not be great either.
That's some effort.
Yeah.
It's why when I get to the end, I go, okay, your name should be this color if you're on the show. If it's not, you need to message me because either one, there's an issue, and that's why I didn't add you yet, because either you didn't fill out your acceptance form or this, that, and the other thing, or you mistakenly think you're on staff or what have you. Or I was going through this and I do all of them by hand, and sometimes I miss one because your username looks the same as everybody else's because I don't know who any of you are unless your username is your actual name.
Sith Lord 3000, come forward, please.
All right.
So we've spoken a lot about different types of events and so forth, and in some ways, some of this is kind of upper level, and it's interesting, and I really dig a lot of what we've said and what we've heard. But for that judge who is just trying to get on staff to their first big event, to their first Gen Con, to their first MagicCon, what can they do to help increase their chances of getting staffed? What closing thoughts can you give somebody that's aspiring to work for Pastimes or for anybody?
So for me, a big thing for someone that is a complete unknown to me is a letter of recommendation from your mentor explaining what you're good at and, why this, would be either a good opportunity for you or why this is something that, they think that you're ready for this type of thing. And it helps if that's someone that I know and trust, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, right? If your local game store owner is like, this person is an outstanding star at every F&M, they're incredible, you have a MagicCon in Atlanta, we're in Savannah, and this is amazing, and you should absolutely have them because it would be amazing and they would be so thrilled. That's not necessarily as informative as someone who is like, I've been a judge for 20 years and here's an analysis of this person on the qualities of a level 3. That's not what I need. that these are both letters of recommendation. They're just two different kinds. They just tell me different kinds of information. So if you have somebody who's like, no, 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 seriously, this person should be here, have them send me a letter of recommendation. That really genuinely does help. I make a little file for everybody and just go bloop. Okay, this one goes in this file. And when I need to go, okay, I don't recognize this person, I'll pop over, search the file, and go, oh, Bruna says that they're this person from Sao Paulo, this, that, and the other. Oh, okay. Now at least I have a little bit of information about them so I can, give them a chance. Very, very rarely do I staff somebody that's genuinely sight unseen, that doesn't have one of those letters of recommendation, or a solid cover letter where they advocate for themselves. Because that's the other way, is it's like, did you write a solid cover letter that is advocating for yourself, that's not just a bullet pointed list of events that you've worked in the past and like the reasons why you actually like should be working this event?
Right. We're big advocates of both, especially if you're going to do a letter of recommendation. That's very cool. Or if you're going to, on your cover letter, more particularly say, this judge will vouch for me, you better talk to that judge first.
Oh, yeah.
Never miss a chance to hammer that one home.
In fact, if it's a letter of recommendation, instead of having them write it, send it to you, and then you send it to me, just have them send it to me on your behalf. Then I know for a fact that you asked for it.
Yep. So I guess one last thing about ballroom magic in general is that, with a MagicCon, you have a much wider array of people and a lot more personalities and, a lot more friend groups, a lot more people who might not be fond of each other, but they're probably not going to see each other that often over the weekend because one might be back of house, one might be registration, and they just don't cross paths that often. But for a smaller event with a smaller team where you might have, people part-time registration in the morning on Friday and Saturday, then they shift over to prize wall, or maybe they shift over to back of house to help when you're loading out a whole bunch of product. How do those dynamics between people change for ballroom magic when, especially in things like Command Fest or these larger CDH tournaments, that could be a real factor?
Like if you need to have two judges on the event because you just need qualified people and those two people don't get along, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, either they don't get along, or maybe you happen to see that, oh, these two, I know they work very well together, I'm going to make sure to put them on this team. Or even just dynamics of hey, I know these two are friends, they might get a little too chatty and get distracted, let me separate them. I don't know. There's a little bit more social dynamics, I think, in the ballroom magic side than necessarily a MagicCon side. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
Those three JudgeCast guys can't be on the same team together.
That has happened more than once.
I think more what it is that it's all the same social dynamics, but you're looking at how diluted they are within the volume of the tournament that you have. So you're right that at a MagicCon, there's a lot more space, there's a lot more place to dilute any given social interaction, social friction. But also with that volume, there's also more social interactions to worry about making sure they stay diluted, right? Making sure they stay away from each other or don't have to interact or whatever it is, right? Whereas when you're talking about something smaller like a ballroom event or like even when you look at an individual event within a MagicCon, like the Pro Tour or the PTQ or one of these type of events or a stage, it's the same social dynamics. You're just zooming in and out on the same kind of issues, right? So it's like the exact same thing that you would run into at a MagicCon if two people were on the same, you know, stage or both on the PTQ or something like that. It's exactly the same kind of social dynamics and stuff you would have to deal with at a ballroom event when those are the only judges that you would have. It's just your options for dealing with it are much fewer. So when you're staffing the show, when you're looking at this, that's part of your planning, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, I need to think about how would I make XYZ work because either I know that these two people either really do not work well together or perhaps they work way too well together and I can't put them next to each other or they're not going to do anything. They're going to stand there and talk to each other all day. It just you have a lot less space to dilute any given problem.
Yeah, and I think the balancing for strengths and weaknesses is really important in every single scale, right? You're going to have your people who are rock solid. You can put them basically anywhere and know that nothing is going to catch on fire. Whereas you're going to balance some of the weaknesses of this might be somebody's first time team leading or first time head judging an event of this size. Let me make sure I back them up with somebody who I know could step in and help them out, that sort of thing. And I think for Ballroom Magic, it's really important to look for the right level of staffing where you can have both those opportunities for newer judges as well as the opportunities for senior judges to do some mentorship, to do some development, because it's really easy to forget about that kind of stuff, especially in the type of events that we're running nowadays. But it's really important to keep up with that kind of development, that kind of mentorship opportunity.
Another thing, now that you're speaking of that mentoring opportunity, that you also have to remember at these ballroom sized events is that is something that is super important. But at these ballroom sized events, the staff is so much smaller, even though the vibes of the tournament don't necessarily feel like it's that much smaller, that any given time that you're doing those type of mentoring things, you want to be really cognizant of the fact that there are less other people in the room to take on the responsibility of like either the tasks or what have you. So if you're doing things like having like team meetings or meeting with folks, those type of things, that's awesome. That's great. But you want to adjust the way that you do that so that you're closer to the floor, so that you're still paying attention, so that you have timers on to make sure that you're paying attention to your tasks and stuff, because there aren't as much backup there for you to be able to have the space to do those things. So you still want to do them. You just want to make sure that you're adjusting the way that you do it to fit the needs of the tournament that you're at. And those ballroom events fit in that strange middle place between the mega large events like MagicCon and the smaller LGSE type of events.
Absolutely. Be prepared for your feedback to be interrupted by judge calls multiple times before you actually get to the point. And that's okay. Note it down, come back to it, you'll be fine.
This is also, at least in my opinion, one of the reasons why reviews and those type of written feedback used to be very in vogue back in the day, where one of our major training grounds for judges were those mid-sized, ballroom-sized PTQs, where you did not necessarily have the time to sit down and have a 45-minute debrief in the middle of round 7. You had stuff you needed to be doing. So it was really important to be able to communicate that feedback in the style of a review afterwards when you actually had the time to process it and communicate it appropriately and clearly without neglecting the needs of the event.
Cool.
I think that about wraps things up. Meg, do you have any? Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your evening with us. Is there anything that you wish to plug or point out that we can also share links to on social media, or anything that you want people to be aware of?
Not at the moment, though. Applications for MagicCon Atlanta should be up very shortly, along with applications for Worlds.
Awesome. Woo. So those would be 2 of the 7 events that you're working on concurrently.
Well, I know Charles in a minute is going to plug the JudgeCast Discord, but I also think it's definitely, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the Gathering Point Discord, which is very popular and also really helpful for judges who are looking to get onto all of these larger events as well, because I know a lot of TOs submit their staffing applications in a way that gets onto that Discord as well, and it's just a really great resource overall for judges in general. So we'll definitely make sure to include the Discord invite in the show notes.
We are up to over 1,300 members in the Gathering Point now.
That's significant. I think the neat thing there is that there's judges from all over the world that are in it. It's not Judge Foundry where it's somewhat limited. It's not our Discord, which is really still kind of small, but the Gathering Point is really a gathering point. So neat.
Well, thank you so much, guys.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming. That was a lot of fun.
Anytime.
All right. That's our episode. Join us next time when we learn about clouds. That's right. We'll talk about the differences between alto stratus and alto cumulus, why elevation has something to do with how they are classified, and what is up with cumulus fractus. Cumulus fractus? I mean, really? We may even teach Bryan how to cloud seed. Until then, you can send us an email at judgecast@gmail.com, or like us on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter at JudgeCast, and on BlueSky at judgecast.bsky.social, and check out any of our social media for invite links to our Discord server for judges new and old, fans, and anyone who supports the judging community. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't spend a moment plugging our newest venture. We're now on YouTube. Come find us at JudgeCast for Level 1 training modules, as well as new and past shows as soon as they are added. Check out our show notes for links, and remember, like and subscribe and ring that bell. I'm Charles Feather, and I keep it fair.
I'm Marcos Sanchez, and I keep it fun.
I'm Bryan Prillman, and I argue that if a chocobo is a dinosaur, then that also means that Skeksis are dinosaurs as well.
Obviously.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.